Welcome edition of the Garden Report is the Celtics come off their West Coast trip. They'll be practicing in the morning. Brenden, I get to go to a game for the first time in like 20 days. So I'm excited about that on Friday. You were at this game between the Celtics and the Kings. Another ugly one, kind of back-to-back ugly ones for the Kings between their Jazz and Celtics back-to-backs here, though I saw they won, 11-13 coming into those back-to-backs. So
Yeah.
solidifying themselves at the top of the conference. I think we last talked before the deadline, I want to say. Yeah, definitely. I think these two teams last met back in November. Another highly anticipated game that the Celtics came out pretty strong out of. So I'm coming out of this one feeling good. The Celtics have been struggling through this West Coast trip, figured a lot of stuff out in this one. But my first question for you is just how much of this one do you think is just this being a tough matchup for the Kings? It looked that way to me to some degree coming out of this one.
It definitely is a tough matchup. Like there was a moment that really popped to me where the size difference stood out. I think like Domantas Sabonis is probably as tall as Jason Tatum, and that has a little bit more to do with Tatum just being huge. But I think that there's a moment where it's Malcolm Brogdon, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Al Horford, Robert Williams. And then on Sacramento's side, it's De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, Terrence Davis, Keegan Murray, and Domantas Sabonis. And it's like, okay, I think that Boston has three guys right now that are just as big as Domantas Sabonis. And typically teams can't switch onto Sabonis because he'll really punish that mismatch. But I think Boston is one of those teams that can really take advantage of that. I do think there's a big aspect, and nobody on Sacramento's side would ever admit this, which I like that, but this was their fifth game in 7 nights through 4 different time zones.
I'm surprised that still exists. It's unbelievable.
It's crazy. It should not.
Yeah. As much as we talk about the schedule, still gets pretty wild. The long road trips this year have been interesting. I got to go on quite a bit of the first one that they went on out west. But they're packing a ton of home games, packing a ton of road games together, which is probably good. But still a ton of back-to-backs. This one, I see how this one lined up, though, because the Kings were coming in on a back-to-back, and the Celtics were at the very end of their 6-game road trip. So I think even though the Celtics had a couple of days off before this, spent in Napa, which sounds nice, I think they came into this one fairly even in terms of kind of the travel and everything else that lined up going into this one. But you're right, that size mismatch stuck out. The Kings switched a lot, which surprised me. Like you saw Sabonis out on Tatum a lot, which didn't go well for him. Tatum was able to get on Fox at times. He was really picking guys apart in this one.
Yeah, he definitely was. I think a lot of it had to do with kind of how they set up those empty sides to almost force Sacramento into switching. And there's a couple guys that you don't want to see on Jason Tatum. And to be honest, there's not really a good answer that Sacramento has, which I think was part of the issue here. Like, I think ideally Kessler Edwards has a little bit of a better game, but if I'm sitting here talking about Kessler Edwards being the answer, that probably says a lot. He got a couple of fouls pretty early in that one. Keegan Murray did okay. And I thought when it came to Jaylen Brown that actually Davion Mitchell was probably the player who did the best job. And even then, that size difference stands out there as well. So even coming into this game, like that size difference does pop, but also the Kings' wing defense, forward defense has not been there for years, really, actually.
So what stuck out to you most about the Celtics out of this one? Big defensive performance, I think, especially is probably what really stands out because this Kings offense is so good. We know that their defense struggles overall, but this is that historic offense we've talked about all season. The Celtics did such a good job turning them over, staying in front of guys, handling the Sabonis high post game, which was mesmerizing in this one, even in a loss. What impressed you most about their defense and the way they matched up with the Kings?
It's probably the just ability to switch on to Sabonis, like I mentioned, but then also do the exact same thing on De'Aaron Fox. Like De'Aaron didn't have his typical sort of fourth quarter performance. And I think some of that has to do with the Kings called it with about, 5-6 minutes left in this game, a little earlier than I expected them to. But I think that it's that. And I think not turning the ball over from the Celtics point of view also helped limit the Kings on offense, because the Kings are a phenomenal transition team. And this was the least amount of turnovers any team has had against Sacramento all year long. And only having 5, I do think really helped that lead to Sacramento only putting up 109 in this when they're averaging upwards of 120.
Yeah, so that's a big part of their scoring has been transition, turnovers, those kind of things.
Yeah, definitely has been. They don't force a crazy amount, but when they do, they definitely score in it. And I think just the differential there definitely stands out for Sacramento to have 14 of their own, which I think, again, had so much to do with the switching and physicality of Boston that stood out as well. And then, again, the least that any opponent has had against the Kings all year.
Yeah, and that was different for Boston. They keep the same starting lineup with White in there. I think the Celtics were still doing that the last time these two teams met during that onslaught to start the year. The offense obviously came back to earth over the last couple months here for them, but they get back into those small ball lineups with White. Horford in the middle looked awesome in this game. Tatum and Brown did their thing. Even Smart, to me, looked a little rejuvenated after a couple weeks where he didn't play as well here. So I like that starting lineup. I didn't know whether coming into this one, the Celtics would go bigger, which probably conventionally thinking you would want to do against Sabonis and company in there. But they're, I think, starting to dictate games a little bit to how they want to play. Rob's just coming back from injury. He was pretty good in this one. But that team we saw last year in Boston with the double big and all that size, now it looks like they're going to embrace that small ball lineup and all the ball handling. So that probably helps not turn the ball over as much. It definitely helps in the 3-point department, shooting 40% in this one. So you saw like 8 players in this game from Boston, pretty tight rotation, and a really good one at that. The second units in this game, I thought, played a big role in the outcome too. Kings are missing Herter. That probably digs into their depth a little bit right now. But when you saw Brogdon and Rob, White mixing into those lineups, Tatum, of course, mixes into a lot of those bench units. That's a pretty imposing bench lineup for Sacramento to have to match up against.
Yeah, I think that they, again, have the size and versatility there in that physicality. And then Sacramento's bench on the other end is Davion Mitchell, Terrence Davis, Malik Monk, and then a little bit of Trey Lyles. But all of those are guards.
Yeah.
I think, again, like the size just really pops off the page. And I do think they miss Kevin Huerter. Kevin Huerter has had a lot of games recently where he'll score, 12 points in half a quarter. And, one of those stretches could have brought Sacramento back in this game. Like, Boston started to pull away, but it was close enough. Sacramento was able to keep it that I thought that maybe there was still a chance. And I actually thought the offensive rebound or defensive rebound that Grant Williams got at like 8 minutes in that fourth quarter, where he dove on the floor and kind of beat all of Sacramento to the ball, was a really big turning moment in my mind. But yeah, I mean, I think that Boston's bench was great. It was fun to watch both these teams get a ridiculous amount of threes up, especially in that first quarter. But that was a crazy shootout at the beginning of that game.
Our good friend Jimmy Toscano here, my co-host on the Garden Report, bet no dunks first 3 minutes. So he was excited watching it fly those first couple minutes.
Yeah, fair enough.
That bet did hit. Speaking of that, we're brought to you by FanDuel here. We'll tell you more about them in a little bit. But they, of course, the official betting partner here at CLNS Media at the Garden Report. You can go over there and sign up at FanDuel.com/Boston for $200 in bonus bets when you replace your first $5 bet. That's with a $10 deposit, of course. FanDuel.com/Boston. Let's go over to the Sacramento side for a little bit. We will circle back to the Celtics later on. I have someone in the chat here asking about Keegan Murray chants. I didn't pick those up. Maybe I missed those during the game, but is that something I missed in this one?
So the announcer will say Keegan's name. He'll go Keegan, and then the entire crowd will go Murray, which is pretty cool. And it originally actually started with Yogi Ferrell.
Remember him well.
3 years ago, something like that, 3 years ago. And I've talked to the announcer about kind of how that came about. And he's like, man, just people that got 2-syllable first names and last names, it works out. And so he just started it with Keegan. That's fully on Scott Moak, the PA announcer there.
How long has he been there for?
The announcer?
Yeah.
Shoot, as long as I've been there, which isn't too long, but it's a decade plus. He's been there a long time.
some of these PA guys are staple. Eddie Palladino in Boston, who's really good. I haven't heard him mentioned or written about in a long time, but he's been there forever, and it's just another good one. There's some really, I think Detroit's was really famous for a while. Miami, of course. There's a lot of good ones around the league, but that's a cool story there. He's looking good to me. Amazing. Harrison Barnes still there, still doing his thing. A lot of good wings here, which made me surprised. Like the difficulty Sacramento had, not only in this game but really all season, just stopping teams. And this is why I think people have a little bit of skepticism with them is the defense. What is it? Still bottom 5-10 in the league. Not a ton of rim protection by the look of it. Perimeter wise, just difficulty stopping the Celtics in this one. They're a high-powered offense, of course, but this has been a problem for Sacramento. Kind of got lit up a little bit by the Jazz in that first game of the back-to-back I was watching as well.
Yeah, 26th in defense there for Sacramento this season. You mentioned there not being any rim protection. Like the best thing Domantas Sabonis does defensively is defensive rebound. And that's not to I think positionally or when it comes to just placement and rotations, that he's actually a okay defender. I think that he has his moments in switching where he'll just make you change directions once enough that a help can come. But their scheme is relying on just all 5 men to be on a string, and that could mean that anybody is left on the weak side to be the rim protector. There's times in that game we saw De'Aaron Fox trying to contest shots at the rim, and that's not a great formula against a team with sort of length like this, but they are a defense by committee even more so than other teams in the league. And I think that De'Aaron has his moments on the defensive end, specifically late in games. Obviously, Davion Mitchell, but Keegan Murray will draw tough assignments. They put him on Bradley Beal, Devin Booker. I think that he started the game on Jaylen Brown last night. And I think that's more of a hoping he can grow into that because I don't think that he's there yet. And Harrison Barnes can still get his buckets, but I think that there's times on the perimeter that he doesn't have that same sort of quick step that he maybe used to have on the defensive end.
And what are we talking now? 10 games left for them, all West teams. So all these games left are going to be pretty important for them. Down to 3 after that loss, or the last 2 losses. Grizzlies win 3 straight. Ja comes back tonight. That probably hurts the case for the 2 seed a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so you're probably talking Warriors, Clippers, maybe Suns. Suns are kind of tough to predict without Durant. But it's probably looking like one of those 3 teams, really good teams in the first round here. And here we go. It's been a great season for them. Ton of growth. I think really anything that they do in the postseason will be accepted by fans there and seen as a successful season, considering how good the West is, or how balanced the West is, rather, and how long it's been since Sacramento's been in the playoffs. But what to you are the expectations for this group in the postseason? Is it going to depend on who they play? Are you just sort of looking at it as gravy no matter what happens here? What's it going to be?
I think that as long as they have a competitive first round, that I feel okay. I think that the expectations will depend on who they play, but I think that it feels like locally at this point, just from the fan base, is that get out of the first round. At this point, you've been in the top 3 of the West, specifically pretty much 3 and flirted with 2 for a little while there, but you've been sitting there for months now, actually. So it's kind of grown to think maybe there should be an expectation that this team gets out the first round. And it's tough depending on what team we're talking about, right? But I think that just a competitive first round is totally fine to me, as long as they are not getting swept, gentlemen swept, or anything like that, which I don't think would be the case against any of these teams that we're talking about potentially being a 6 or 7. So I think that that's pretty much where I'm at. And I'm also at the point where I don't know that I'd be shocked they'd be bounced in the first round. I don't know I'd be totally shocked if they managed to get to the Western Conference Finals, though. I think this team is good enough on offense to beat anybody and just have to get by on defense.
So what's the path? You've watched this team game in, game out. Out of the teams we're tossing around here, and I even throw some playing teams into the conversation because they could finish second. It's conceivable. who do you think they need to see round one to make you feel really good that they're going to be into round two?
I definitely feel fine about OKC. I have been saying it's been Dallas that I've circled for a little while here.
Just a
I
shootout series with them.
exactly. If I am just betting on who's getting to 130 first, like give me the best offensive rating of
That
all
would be a
time.
great series.
So that's kind of where I've been at there. And I don't know, Golden State is kind of interesting to me. I would definitely favor Golden State. It's the postseason experience, right? But it's Mike Brown's former team, which makes for a fun
They need to
scenario
win a
there.
road game to win the series.
Right. Though the Sacramento would have home court advantage. So I think that the team that stands out to me that has stood out to me the most is Dallas, but with like OKC kind of being right there, I would rather play OKC, I think, between the two and any of the teams that are in the play-in right now. I'm not too worried about Minnesota or Utah. I don't want anything to do with the Lakers, I will say. If LeBron is healthy, like I'm good. I think that
That's
that
interesting. I
wouldn't be the
love talking
greatest.
Lakers. We had I can't think of his name on one of our guests last week. Just didn't want to talk Lakers at all. Because I think some people just still look at them and roll their eyes, but I do find them fascinating too. I'm in that boat with you. If they get in, if they're in that play-in tournament and they break through and they're healthy, this conference is so balanced that I think they could knock off whether it's Denver, Memphis, Sacramento. I don't think that would stun anybody. As bad as they started this year, as awful as they've looked at times, and how erratic they've been the last couple of seasons, there could be some real craziness in this conference. There really could be. And I know it doesn't matter as much to the Celtics. They got to get to the finals to see any of these teams. But I'm going to be watching from afar, just like at the explosions and fire and chaos, just in awe of what's happening out west. Because I think there could be some crazy upsets. There could be some series that really go the distance. And you look at Sacramento, I know there's a lot of skepticism around them, but with how injured this conference is, how inconsistent so many of these teams have been all year, and like you just talked about the home court advantage that they've built for themselves in most of these series now, even into round two possibly. I'm believing a little bit. I am.
Yeah, and I think that there's reason to, like when they're sitting at this top 2, 3 for as long as they have been, and there just being so many question marks with seemingly every other team in the West, and maybe not so Denver, but they have struggled post All-Star break defensively, sort of similarly to what Sacramento has been for most of the year, that it could be anybody that comes out of this conference, man. And that includes Sacramento. I don't know that everybody necessarily feels this way, but I think that the Lakers are right there, as we kind of talked about, as a team that could make it out. I think they have a second best defense post All-Star break, and it's still LeBron James, Anthony Davis we're talking about here, and I'm never going to overlook those guys. So I have zero clue what to expect in this Western Conference playoff race.
I'm looking at the odds right now as they stack up. They're interesting. Bucks favorites right now to win the championship. That's not stunning to me. And I start to think of like all the forwards that they've stacked up, and I do get a little bit nervous for the Celtics there, especially as they've ceded home court in that series, which made a huge difference between them last year. Suns, third and favorite among all the West teams, so they're neck and neck with the Nuggets. And as we touched around the Lakers, they are significant favorites above the Kings, which is stunning to me when they're not even in a playoff spot right now. Kings plus 6,500 to win the title, which is pretty disrespectful if you're asking me. And I get it, the defense, so many of these guys being new to the postseason, and this whole thing just coming together so fast here. And I guess one thing I've heard is the clutch games, like them being this really good team in close games, playing a lot of close games. I don't know how much you've tracked that this year, but how big of a factor has that been in their success?
Yeah, they're sixth in win percentage in the clutch, and Milwaukee and Boston are both above them there, but they've played 51 clutch games, and they're 29 and 22. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at Miami's for a second there. 40 games played, and they're 24 and 16. I thought that number didn't sound right at first, but 40 puts them about like top 10 in the amount of clutch games played. And it's really just been De'Aaron Fox, man. Like the other guys are able to come through as well. And I mentioned their defense late in games does really step up. Last I had checked, they were 8th in defensive rating in the fourth quarter, even though they are, like I said, what was it? I think 26th they'd fall into now on the entire season. But it's so much of it is De'Aaron Fox. He's averaging the most clutch minutes out of anybody in the league. And I think he's doing it on right around 54% from the field, ridiculously efficient, and probably the front runner right now for that new Jerry West Clutch Player of the Year award, with maybe a little bit of like Joel Embiid and Jalen Brunson flirting with it there. But a lot of it has to do with De'Aaron Fox, and those guys will actually sit down and play some defense at that point.
I like it. I'm interested in his All NBA case too. When we get back, I want to circle back to that list that could feature 2 Kings. I'm interested in your take on how many are going to end up sitting in that list when the year comes to an end here as we close in on that. But first, mention those finals odds. That and a lot more available over at FanDuel, which is now available here in Massachusetts. The wait's finally over. America's #1 sportsbook is now live, and new customers of Mass can get in on the action with $200 in bonus bets, as I said earlier, guaranteed. Jimmy won on the no dunks, and there's a bunch of different props, futures, games, live, whatever you want to get in on. It's all available at FanDuel.com/Boston. Give it a shot and get your $200 in bonus bets to play around with, and bet all your favorite sports. Like I said, money lines available, point spreads, player props, more. So bet now on an app that's safe, secure, super easy to use. Don't miss your chance to get $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel.com/Boston. Make every moment more on America's #1 sports bet. Of course, 21 plus and present in Mass. Got to be present in Mass for this offer. First online real money wager only, $10 first deposit. Required bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Hope is here. Gambling helpline, ma.org or 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support. I'm intrigued by this All-NBA list for a bunch of different reasons, Brenden. First, no one can figure out the positions. Second, as you saw in post-game last night, a lot of talk about Jaylen Brown's future in Boston. That's going to be heavily tied to his ability to get the Supermax, which we discussed at length last night on the post-game show. I'm not going to get a ton into the Jaylen stuff here unless you kind of have any burning takes on it. But this All-NBA process, the list, the possibilities of who could land on this list, it's pretty competitive at the guard spot, which is going to be interesting for De'Aaron Fox and maybe Jaylen Brown. Because it seems like from lists I've looked at from voters who have put some of their names out there that people are considering Brown at guard, which makes it difficult because I'm looking at the list of guys that could be involved at guard. Of course, Luka, of course, Donovan Mitchell. There's some names that are relative locks there, along with a number of different competitors. Whether you're throwing in a name like Fox. Curry hasn't played a lot this year, but he's been spectacular when he has. Shea looks like a mainstay on this list now. Halliburton's been amazing, but he's missed time. Lillard might be a lock. Morant's back. It looked like he was about to fall off this list, but he might be back in this fold now if he really finishes strong. Brunson, as you mentioned earlier. Harden has unbelievable stats. Garland. I think even Drew Holiday's been really good, even though his points don't stack up. So the list is just ridiculous at guard.
Yeah, there's still Devin Booker. Like, I don't think that Trae Young is... I wouldn't place Trae Young all too close, but I think his name is out there. Zach LaVine. Like, it is so tough. And when I went and made my list and actually just kind of did this today for an exercise, I put Jaylen at forward, but it was admittedly because I was like, I also think of him more as a forward, but also like there's way too many guards here that like just give me a couple more forwards, because by the time I got to third team forwards, I was like, I don't really know.
You
like,
run out of names.
Kind of. And
Yeah.
It's not even close to the same for guards, right? And it's like, it would be so crappy if Jaylen didn't make it because the votes got split between positions. And I think it just makes no sense that that's even a possibility. When it comes to guards, did end up putting De'Aaron Fox, and I really do think that it's not me being a homer. I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't make it. I wouldn't be surprised if he did. It feels like it goes both ways. And I think that the biggest argument for De'Aaron is like his counting stats all look good. It's not like it's anything to scoff at, but it's the jump in efficiency he's taken, but specifically all his clutch performances. I think he has 3 or 4 straight up game winners on the year, meaning, there's more clutch buckets in there as well, but that last specific shot won the game, which is a pretty good rate for this year. And he's averaging, like I said, the most clutch points on 54% from the field in the clutch. He's been ridiculously good there. But when it comes to guards, like I went with Luka and Donovan Mitchell first team, SGA and Curry second. And then I did go with Harden and Fox on that third team. It's really tough to leave Damian Lillard out. And even admittedly kind of Devin Booker. I went away from Booker sort of because of games played and was just unsure there. But I don't know, man. 13th seed in the West. Does that get all NBA when it comes to Dame Lillard? I don't know.
It's hard because you're balancing winning stats. The stats are ridiculous, and that's why I did put him into my mix here. I'm gonna cop out and not pick pick the team specifically, but my 6 would probably be Doncic, of course. He's got to be one of the locks, right? If we're gonna go from locks to guys more on the edge, I think Mitchell should be among the locks. Shea should be among the locks, I think.
Me too.
And I think Lillard's stats are just so ridiculous that I'm going to put him in there solidly, despite the losing, despite him probably not appearing in the playoffs. I don't look at this as much as the most valuable thing and the winning adding to it. I'm going to go with his passing totals and the 30-plus points and the ridiculous shooting, 11 threes a game, and the efficiency he's done that on been remarkable. And I know he's missed some time. I'm going to weigh that heavily as well. So I'm going to put Fox in. I think he's played quite a bit. You mentioned the clutch. I think that's all warranted of him being in there. And then I really got stuck on the last one. Who was your last one?
Curry.
I'm stuck between Curry and Brunson because Brunson's played a lot. But I'm going to go Curry because he's been ridiculous when he's played.
And there is some name value. Like I think that.
And I think that happens. I think that works.
Yeah,
I think that's
not
how
saying
it goes.
for myself, but I do. Yeah, like you said, I think that happens.
Mm-hmm. So let's go to forward since we both agree Brown should be in that mix. I'll start Tatum, Giannis, probably the 2 locks.
Easy. Yep.
I don't want to be unfair with Giannis here because I think we're going to look at other centers and not move them around as much. But in terms of time played at center this year, is he more forward than center? I'm going to take a quick look here.
Yeah.
He's 60 forward, 40 center. So it's fair. I just want to double check that. My other name's Randall. I think the weight he carries is ridiculous in New York. So I'm going to have him here. Butler's played more than I thought he has. And I think he's really been the driving force in Miami, of course, in a really uneven year for them. So he's in my mix. Jaylen is in my mix. He's got to be. Again, like this just isn't a stacked field right here. And then my last 2 that I'm tossing around are Markkanen and Siakam. Siakam's stats have been really good. I see he's slid a little bit since the All-Star break. But everyone else is hurt. LeBron, Kawhi didn't play a ton this year. George is about to miss the rest of the season, it looks like, for the most part. Zion probably is a lock for this if he plays, but he really hasn't this year. Ingram may be in that mix as well. So the door is wide open for Brown here.
I put Brown on my second team with Julius Randle.
Over Butler?
After that, yeah, over Butler. And then from there, I think Lauri Markkanen, and I'm like kind of stuck on the last one. If LeBron was coming back any day, I think he could be there. I think Anthony Davis could be in the conversation.
See, I can't do Davis. 100% of his minutes at center this year.
Okay, fair enough. Siakam is probably the one for me. I think the jump that he's taken as a passer really stands out to me, and he was already phenomenal as a scorer getting downhill. decent rebounder and a solid defender too. I think it goes, Randall and Jaylen, and then Markkanen and Siakam for me.
Real quick, does Sabonis get in with Embiid and Jokic?
I think that's an easy yes for me. I mean, the other guy's Bam Adebayo, right? But
And Davis.
yeah, that's interesting. I wonder how people go about what positions they decide to put guys in.
So is it the majority of the votes you get is your position? Is that
I
how
don't.
that works? I'm
I
pretty
was
sure
under.
that's how it works.
Okay, I hope that's how it works. I was under the impression that it's like if you got half on guard and half on forward, that like you were splitting your
No, I
vote.
think it all goes to the majority
Okay,
that you
I would
get.
hope so. I would
Yeah.
hope so.
So that's how, I think some people voted Embiid as a forward last year to fit him and Jokic on that first team, but he didn't get the majority forward. So that's like he didn't get split on forward center. He just landed right on the second team behind Jokic. But this stuff is getting frustrating, especially where it's deciding guys' contracts. Ja's
Right.
going to face this one and done that Tatum did at one point on the rookie extension. Brown gets 2 shots at it, so if he doesn't make it this year, he can make it next year and still earn that supermax. But again, I think we both have him solidly in that forward field. If he is a guard, does he miss it?
I don't know. It feels like a coin flip. Like
I think he's out.
I
Especially when you think
think
of some of these other
so
guys.
too. I think if he is a guard, he's probably out.
And that, it makes sense because these other guards are doing more with the ball than he does, which is why he's a forward.
Right. Agreed.
Fox, Curry, Mitchell, Shea, Lillard, Doncic. You just think of how those guys play. That's not the style Brown plays. So I don't know. I'm very interested to see how that goes. It's going to be a tough race. Going to be probably a contentious race once everyone stops talking about MVP. I think this has actually been the more interesting race here. And of course, injuries always loom large. I think they're about to put a games played minimum on this too, which is going to be interesting. I don't know where they're going to actually place that.
Last year, I checked it out. Last year, the lowest games played to make it was KD with 55. LeBron had 56. Morant had 57. All of those guys made it.
Yeah, and to answer this guy's question, I looked a couple days ago at this. I believe Brown's position split is 60-40 forward, at least according to Basketball Reference. And I don't really know how they track this, but that's where they have it at. And that's kind of where I have it at too. I think he has played quite a bit of 2 technically, if that's what you want to call it, because they play double big a lot. But I don't know. Do they have to just dump the position stuff here and just go 15, best 15, no matter what you play?
Probably. I mean, yeah, I don't know. You could do it a little differently. It's definitely weird to me that like center still exists. I feel like it should be guards and forwards the same way. Like, why is this not at least the same as all stars? But I
Because
think
they
so.
do front court, back court,
Yeah.
and
2 backcourt and 3 front court.
yeah, so there's no centers.
Right.
If you got rid of centers here, though, I feel like they'd be hurt quite a bit because, again, we have that overrepresentation of guards and center. I mean, like a Sabonis, would he even be in the mix if you were just doing top 15?
Probably not. Maybe. De'Aaron would not be, I don't think, but I think so. Sabonis still might. I don't know. It's close. Those guys are right on the fringe, right?
Yeah, it's tough because and this was my take a year ago when the Embiid Jokic debate was going on, is that like Wilton Russell had a battle for that first team, and Hakeem and Shaq, whatever you want to say. Like this happened in the past. Guys who probably were top 2 players at their time or top 5 would fall to second team because of the positions. But the game has just changed too much, and it's going to start to reflect that, I think, because it's too hard to determine who's playing what position. I mean, Jokic plays like a point guard, and you could consider him a point for a lot of the stuff he does, but he's at that center spot with Embiid, and they probably both should have been on a first team last year and this year for that matter. I think all 3 of your MVP candidates are all at that same position by and large. So I find that conversation interesting, especially with the Jaylen stuff. I don't know if you read the interviews. You were there last night when he answered questions about it. Said some of the stuff he said got taken out of context. He might clarify it down the line, but he's just focused on winning some games right now. I saw you got to ask him a question about Sabonis as well. What do you make of this Brown situation brewing in Boston a year out from his free agency?
I think that people made too big of a deal out of his comments. Logan Murdoch was the one that wrote it, right, for the Ringer.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that till after the presser that it was Logan that wrote it, because Logan was in the room when Jaylen was saying everything, which made for an interesting dynamic there, to say that sometimes reporters take things out of context to try and fit their own narrative, right?
Yeah.
But I thought that Logan's piece was actually really good and clarified a lot of things that Jaylen has gotten crap for before. And it was an extremely long piece too. And then right at the end, that quote is what gets aggregated and put everywhere, right? And Jalen's just saying, like, I just want to be where I want to be. That's not, I don't want to be here, or I want to be where I am wanted. That's not that I don't want to be here, but if they want me, I'm glad to be here, is pretty much how I take that. Like, I don't think that I don't think that specific quote should be read into more than anything. I get why it's like Jalen's been in trade conversations before, but what we're talking about, like Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis, like these are MVP caliber players. Is it really that weird that you're including a guy that's an all-star but not MVP caliber guy in those conversations? So I don't know. I mean, I get why that people are questioning what is going to happen in his pending free agency, because that's how it always happens. But I don't think any of his comments stood out to me as he doesn't want to be in Boston. Like, I don't think it makes sense anymore, to be honest, for a player to come out and say, like, I 100% plan on being back here. You know, I mean,
I
Celtics
agree
have
with
dealt
that.
with that before. And like, if you change your mind because of circumstances change, then you'll never hear the end of it, which isn't exactly what happened with Kyrie, obviously. But
Yeah, I think that's actually where his approach stemmed from, was seeing what happened with Kyrie when he answered that question the way he did. Now, I think most people would go about that question in more of like a positive, vague way. Like, I'd love to be here for a long time. That's in the future. We'll see how it goes. I think sort of pointing in the other direction and giving a challenge, like, oh, if I'm wanted, if I feel good about them, they feel good about me. I think it leaned more in the negative direction, especially when you add the context of some of his discontent with the trade rumors and the way that went down. I think that probably stacks up there at the top. And there's a lot of the New York Times interview he gave talked about Boston and racism and things like that, which I think are going to be heavy motivators for him for sure, especially when it feels like he's been restricted in the business things he wants to pursue here in Boston. And then you add in, I think, something he's talked about a lot in terms of him being his own player, showing that he's as good as anyone else in this league. Because you mentioned, yeah, it's Durant, it's Kawhi. I think he's always kind of been a guy who looks at those guys, and even Tatum, and says, I'm on par with these guys. Like, I remember I asked him about Tatum getting double teamed last year, and he was like, I get double teamed too, and I deal with that. And he's always wants to assert his own stature, which I think is why he's become as good as he is. And again, we're talking about him as a top 15 guy in this league if he is in that all NBA field. I just wonder what it would look like if he did leave Boston, lead his own team. Like, would he join a Sacramento and go kind of become the face of a team like that, or even like a losing team that would have the cap space to sign him? Would he just want to go to a marquee market where he'd have that visibility? And I know Boston, like among NBA teams, is a big market, but we're talking like a Miami, a Los Angeles, things like that. I think the toughest thing out of these interviews he gave is that you don't get a firm grasp on what he's looking for, especially from the Celtics. If there is discontent here and he does have some uneasiness about how things are going here in Boston, like, what can the Celtics do to correct that? It's not like they're going to take the ball from Tatum and make this Browns team just to appease him. It's a very difficult spot for them.
yeah, I guess my 2 cents on that last thing is, I don't know that I don't feel like a player should like have to explain that to media. I think as long as that's being expressed behind closed doors to front office members and coaching staff and things like that, that's fine. I think like publicly saying it on record is a very different thing though. But obviously there's no way of us knowing like what's going on behind closed doors with that.
Yeah. And I've compared this Brown Tatum thing. I know they might not be the same stature players, but the Kings went out very, very early in these guys' careers and split up Fox and Halliburton, who maybe could have done some special things together. Looking at what Halliburton's become out there in Indiana, they go and get a better fit maybe for the two in Sabonis, who I was actually looking at last year is not a Brown trade target, but maybe something like Smart and Rob for Sabonis, just as a way of unlocking Brown and Tatum's games. And they found other ways to do it with Derrick White, and Smart's become a great point guard for them and stuff like that. But if you do get the sense that Brown might look elsewhere in a year, do you look to trade him? Is there even any way that you could find a deal that would make it be worth it? Because that's where I get stuck. I don't think there's a deal out there that makes a ton of sense unless like another star becomes available, and it's sort of like that Harden Simmons thing we saw a year ago.
Yeah, you'd have to just like, if you know for certain that he's leaving and that in the offseason, then the only logic in my mind is like, well, I don't want to lose him for nothing. But even then, it's like, well, you could just hold on to him for one more year and have a shot at a championship, because you trade him, you're going to get a worse return than what he currently is. Like, that's just the nature of how it works when a guy doesn't want to be there, right? He's an expiring contract at that point. I guess from like Sacramento's point of view, Keegan Murray and whatever filler and every like 3 first-round picks, like sure. But what does that do for Boston?
I'd be asking for Sabonis.
Yeah, it's not happening.
All right, we'll circle back to that when we get there. Good to have you here as always. Brenden Nunes writes for the Kings Herald and podcasts over at Blue Wire with Kings Pulse. So go check those out. And of course, follow him at Brenden Nunes NBA. I want to give a shout out to our other sponsor here, Athletic Greens. As always, Athletic Greens, great sponsor here at the Garden Report. Go to athleticgreens.com/Garden for a 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. It's vitamins, minerals, adaptogens, probiotics, and more all in one place. You can get these in your diet and other locations, supplements, but it all adds up. This is just one stop for all of these things to give you a nice energy boost, to give you the different things to power your body that you need, especially in the springtime here. Get a fresh start with Athletic Greens and get a year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs on top of it with all the other great things that come with their subscriptions, like bottles, containers, and more at athleticgreens.com/garden. And BetterHelp is back. Want to give them a shout out as well. Licensed therapist on your phone. If you feel like you need to talk to somebody, this is great location to do it and get the right therapist for you, which is very important. BetterHelp.com/Garden will get you 10% off your first month when you head over there. That's at BetterHelp.com/Garden. Brenden, appreciate you. Kings, it's going to be a fun postseason run out there. You're going to be covering postseason games, which I'm sure you're very excited about. And who knows, might be a magical run out there for them the way this season has gone so far, especially in a wide open West. So I'm very excited to follow your coverage of it all and watch this team some more. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, there'll be a Celtics Kings finals, and we'll circle back for that.
Hopefully, Bobby, we'll see what ends up happening. Appreciate you having me on, man, and keep up all the great work on your side as well.
All right, you as well, Brenden. Good night.